Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today, my guests are Sneha Parthasarathy and Zoha Razvi. They are the principal architects of Deccan Amalgam based in Hyderabad. Deccan Amalgam is a multidisciplinary design studio that was founded in 2016 by both the principal architects. The studio's design and research initiatives are aimed towards improving the interaction with the city, its topography, landscape, history, infrastructure, politics, and people. Deccan Amalgam, as a studio, believes that every space in the city, no matter its scale, affects the city and the way we inhabit it, and are interested in understanding the relationship between any scale of space or situation and its larger natural and human made context. This penchant for deciphering this complex web of interdependencies that influence the built environment and not just the end product is the focus of their process. Through their projects, they are constantly trying to understand the ever changing world and how a design studio like theirs can make an informed intervention. Sneha Parthasarathy is one of the principal architects and co founder of Deccan Amalgam. She has a master's from Advanced Studies in Architecture from ETSAB Barcelona. Prior to founding the studio in 2016, after completing her graduate studies in architecture, she spent about 10 years working and studying in cities around the globe. She has worked with studios at the forefront of varied specializations, which provided her an experience of designing projects of different scales and materiality. She is passionate about documenting her travel and work experience and maintains a blog for her architectural musings called Architecture and the City. You can check this out at snehaparthasarthi.blogspot.com. Zoha Razvi is the other principal architect and co-founder of Deccan Amalgam. He has a master's degree from Architecture Management and Design from Institute of the Impresa, Madrid. Post his undergraduate studies in architecture, he has been working on architecture and planning projects in Doha since 2006. Having spent most of his childhood working years in the Middle East, he has witnessed a dramatic growth and urbanization of new cities ground up. This has made him acutely aware of the importance of architecture in the building of humane cities. His other big interest is the ergonomics and mechanical workings of automobiles and spends his leisure time designing them. He's also a trained bike racer. Thank you so much, both Sneha and Zoe, for doing this podcast, this episode with me. Really interested in the many aspects your practices has been engaging. A very young practice in Hyderabad called Deccan Amalgam, which does architecture, planning, conservation, and a lot of other things as well. Also, but before I want to start, I want to actually know a little bit about your formidable years. Uh, Both of you had a wonderful career prior starting your own practice. So I want to start off with that, and then we can kickstart our conversation.
Yeah. Vivek, firstly, thank you for having us. And like I was mentioning before, this gives us an opportunity to sort of reflect on our work and also reflect on the common ground where both of us come together. I mean, I think the name of the firm, Deccan Amalgam, sort of embodies this quest for finding common ground, considering our paths have been so different in terms of professional experience, in terms of cultural experiences. So we come from very different backgrounds. So we are constantly looking for that common ground, and through our work, it's a quest to find that common ground. So so we look at ourselves like a microcosm, like the studio is a microcosm of the city, because we have people from diverse backgrounds working. So yes, one person can take the lead and say we have to do this, but the other way is like, how do you work collaboratively with different voices? Because at the end of the day, we aspire to actually work in the public realm. So then, if we have to figure out a way to sort of learn from multiple experiences, because the city is not about one voice, it is about multiple voices. So how would you like to go first, or yeah. I think that my interest with regards to architecture has always been about how we can intervene in the larger public realm. And it started with my thesis project, undergrad thesis, which was order and chaos, conflicting dimensions of a railway station node. So at that point of time, there was this huge government proposal to, I think it went through as well, to consolidate all the bus stops around Secunderabad railway station. I mean, you might know, it's actually spread out now. And they were looking at the Gandhi Hospital site as a prospective, area where to have this gigantic internodal station. So I was actually looking at how, I was looking at the beauty and the sort of the chaos that exists around, the station, and it creates this vibrant environment where it also facilitates, small hawkers because of the movement between these various bus stops. So I'm like, isn't that movement actually good? Should we be looking at consolidating all of it? So it was essentially about how do you, and this is a sort of a dichotomy in all conditions in India where we really have to question whether, yes, you have to impose an element of order completely, or how do you, or is that order actually going to help all strata of society? That's important. That's an important question to ask, or is there actually something that comes out of chaos? So, it was actually, and I'm very grateful for my thesis guide, Ms. Nahima Shanawaz. So she really helped me and look, I mean, I think it was an ambitious project to take up at an undergrad level, but because she herself is a planner, so it was quite helpful to have her as my thesis guide. So I think, and through that, I had also presented it at the, and of course, Professor Akhtar Chauhan was really of Rizvi College. He was really kind to offer that I come and present my theses at the ICHH, which used to happen. I don't know if it still happens every year. So I think that was my first trip to, post college. I was also active with NASA and all of that because I was a unit secretary back then. But it was like my, I think it was quite a revealing trip to go and engage with students of architecture, and also professionals from the urban realm. So there are a lot of planning professionals. So that was one of my first sort of learning experiences, because then I got to interact and I also received some kind of feedback about my work. So, but before that, I had actually taken a break from college. Like Zoha also had taken a break from college. So we realized at some point of time, and thanks to our professor, Mr. Ali Farid, who was the HOD back then, he was like, maybe you guys need to work and then come back. And that's something, I feel like, our curriculum absolutely lacks the sense of what's happening in the real world. So, you spend 4 years of your education, 5 years, of course, 6 months you spend in internship, and then it's sort of the real world is a kind of a root shock. So it was a nice decision to take a break from college for 1 year, work somewhere else, and then come back and then join academics again. So 3 of us, I remember from our batch, had dropped out and done that. Zoha had come to work in Doha then. And I chose to work there locally with the conservation architect, Suranarayan Murthy. I think that was, one of the, quite instrumental in helping me sort of approach projects in the city from a research standpoint. And Sir is so well, he's so well informed about the history of the city, etc. So at that point of time, I was helping with, the Charminar pedestrianization project, which you see, which has been done at the moment. I'm not sure if it's done to the full extent as it was visualized, but I was part of that project and also mapping heritage structures in Mysore. And also like we were writing a small paper on the history of Sikandrabad back then. So, I mean, I think it was a wonderful experience to learn from architect Suryanarayan Murthy. Post which, although I got back to college, I used to work after college. So, I mean, that was just to learn more, learn more about the field, but also to make, some money for my expenses. I mean, at the end of the day, we architects have to also eat. Roti kapra makan. So, so I worked with a landscape architect back then. There's this firm called Naveen Associates. I worked there, and then worked with an interior designer as well. So these were like brief stints, but it was basically working post college hours, and then going back home at 10 in the night. So yeah, and then finally I interned with Beyond Built in Bangalore with Nupur Protekana. She is a landscape conservation architect. Now that's completely different from conservation. That's so I was actually pushing myself into new realms all the time, just to understand, because I feel like if we cannot look at design in isolation, design of any kind, right? Many factors influence design. So we need to, I just felt like it is best to sort of expose yourself to these various specializations within the realm of the built environment. So so with her, it was very interesting because we were working on historic landscape gardens. So we were working on and across the country, like from Jammu to Amritsar, I was working on a project in Srirangapatnam, and then there was a conference, and I'm very thankful to her that she actually took me along with her for a conference in Hampi, a UNESCO heritage conference, which was about cultural landscapes. So that widened my understanding of what landscapes are. Landscapes are just not what you see as the green, but there are also the tangible and the intangible aspects of any cultural landscape that we are looking at. And then how do gardens sort of embody this cultural nuance of the place? So it was an absolutely wonderful learning experience, and I'd also gotten to attend a ISOLA conference back then. Post working there, I came back to Hyderabad, was working at Studio Mate for a year. So that was almost like an extension of internship, because we're just coming out of college knowing nothing. So I'm grateful for that initial experience as well, because that really helped me slow down a lot. Because I guess we architect Madhusudan sort of takes a very long time, and he takes I mean, his projects are not to be taken lightly because of the amount of time that goes into it. So I guess it was a really good experience working with him, but also at the same time, I was teaching in college. But I was working with him. I was teaching modern and contemporary architecture for 5th semester students. So to be actually, teaching as well as practicing was again a very good experience, because I was able to relate to what work was being done and why it was being done. And then I would go back and I was preparing myself, right? Because these are subjects we never paid attention to in college. So it was a whole re-education for myself. And then, you're trying to make it fun for other people to learn, because that you didn't find it interesting because, I don't know, because people were not able to relate to it. People were questioning, why do we have to do a theory subject? What is there in it? And I guess, and it's sad that, a lot of us sort of don't pay attention to precedents, right? A precedent study where you actually know gestures that have been, or rather ideas that have been executed in the past, and for whatever reason. So the reasons could have been economic, the reasons could have been historic, the reasons could be social, but all of these aspects that make architecture one of integrity, I guess that is something students need to sort of get a hang of. How do you actually design, but design in such a way that you're well informed about the canvas, the larger canvas on which you're placing your building, right? So I feel like theory subjects are something that we have to pay more close attention to. And for me, that was a good experience as well, having, teaching as well as practicing at the same time. And then after that, I applied for masters. I got into Columbia University, an amazing university. We had Professor Kenneth Frampton, who was teaching history, but I came back. I dropped out of the course because I just felt that was not the right time for me. I mean, nothing to do. I mean, lovely city, Manhattan is so vibrant. It's just amazing. And but I just felt that maybe I should take more time to sort of understand what I really want to do. So, I mean, that was a kind of a that was a kind of a risky step for me to drop out and come. But I guess life had other plans. So I remember while coming back, I was passing by Bombay, and I'm like, I'm going to come back to the city. So it's always been like that with me. It's more like instinctive. So I just know that maybe I should come back to the city, and I feel like I'm going to come back to the city, and somehow I end up there. So I applied to RMA, and I worked there for almost 2.5 years. Again, like a tremendous, learning curve. I mean, I'm sure you know yourself. And Bombay is like an amazing city. I just fell in love with the city, right? Like, coming from a small, like not like a sleepy town, right? And you suddenly pushed into this extremely energetic city, which is so time conscious, which is so money conscious, that you're like a little unnerved. Because I remember when the first time I took a cab, he didn't refuse me. Most auto drivers in Hyderabad, you have to haggle with them, and then they end up acting like they're doing you a favor by taking you. So I think that says a lot about the culture of Hyderabad. So Bombay, I took a cab. He gave me back a rupee, Vivek, like a rupee, right? So I was like, this doesn't happen. This doesn't happen. So I just feel like, the amount of importance to time and money, that's a different learning altogether. And I'm so glad for, to have worked at RMA. I think it was like a extension of a family. And also the work culture was so exactly what I needed. Extremely disciplined, and also the amount of learning that you get from site. So we used to travel a lot, make a lot of site visits, and just the amount of stuff that you learn from construction sites that can actually put you on a very different trajectory of understanding, and also the level of detailing that is required to see an idea through. That's important. I'm really grateful for Rahul, and I'm really thankful for Robert, because both of us used to travel a lot, and I learned a lot from him through all our trips and conversations. Right. And yeah, so I was there for about 2.5 years. And then after that, I got back to Hyderabad. I would briefly collaborate on competitions with yeah, so we had worked on to the Bamia Cultural Center again with the Studio Made. And then after that, I sort of went on to do my went on to work with at Sangat. So that was in 2014. Yeah. 2014. Though I was there for a very brief time, I was there for just a short of a year. But I had the opportunity of working with all three partners: architect Zongehu, architect Rajiv Katpalia, and Mr. Doshi himself. So that was actually quite a by chance experience, because architect Rajiv Katpalia then was actually traveling, and so we were working on the master plan. It's a competition project, master plan for IIM. So, and then because architect Rajiv Katpalia was traveling, so
Was it
I had the opportunity of working.
Was it IIM Udaipur?
Yes, I am Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad, okay.
Ahmedabad.
Okay.
So, on that project, I worked personally with Mr. Doshi, and he would tell me to go visit every day. He would say, just just go there, spend some time. And then, every time I would come back, there would be a question which I would have never thought about. Like, he asked me once, did you actually talk to the sweeper? Did you find out what he wanted? So, I mean, like, we're always looking at talking to all the big guys and finding out what the student wants. And, he just throws like something at you, like, did you talk to the sweeper? Did you find out what he wants? So I guess to be more inclusive in the way we are thinking about design, that is something I learned from Sangat, to think about different kinds of people who are, and especially in the Indian context, it is important for us to be, cognizant about this, because very few architects, I mean, I don't know, even in Hyderabad, everyone's looking at, I mean, I'm not saying it is not important, but everyone's looking at building for individuals, private properties, commercial, hospitality, etc., etc. No one's really looking at how do we better the public realm. How do we actually make it convenient? Okay, so what happens within your house? What happens when you step outside in a pothole? So shouldn't we be, I mean, what about the person who doesn't have money to go to a cinema theater? What is he going to enjoy in the city, right? So, and these are questions that actually, living in Barcelona helped me reflect about these things as well. But also when I was working at Doshi's, I also went for the Glen Market masterclass, which was in 2014. Another huge, humbling experience. Just knowing that there is an alternate way of doing things. You don't have to necessarily feel pressured by doing things a certain way. There's a complete alternate realm of approaching design and architecture. How do you actually, and also it's all about how the way you want to live your life, your lifestyle, what are your priorities, and etc., right? So yeah, I mean, it was a humbling experience to say the very least, and it was great to be working with all the mentors over there, and also to meet all these people from all over the world. So yeah. And then later on, after Sangat, I had come back to Hyderabad briefly, and that is when I'd organized a couple of walks that particular time, the Jane Jacobs walks, in 2015. So I mean, I had gone for one of these walks. I tried to register for one of these walks that were held in Bombay, and I couldn't really participate because there was a limit on the number of people that could. And then, that helped me look into her works and find out what it was and how can we bring these walks to Hyderabad, So, I mean, basically, these are neighborhood walks. They're not about heritage. They're not about building. They're not about, the more obvious things about architecture. They're about how do you inform people about, the city, and how do you actually inform them about concepts of diversity, making cities more inclusive, making, spaces lively, more accessible, less private, more public, right? And these are things that are important for us to educate, citizens about. So we did like walks in two different neighborhoods, Maratpalli and Mogalpura, very different neighborhoods, both actually both developed by the planning department, one by the town planning department, which was based in, which was actually run by the British, and the other one by, the City Improvement Board, Hyderabad, CIB. So the idea was to take walkers through two different neighborhoods and see, if we are able to identify what makes one neighborhood starkly different from the other, right? And that is like sort of educating them in the cultural nuances that make up the city. So the city is not just one, right? The city is like a amalgamation of different neighborhoods with various different different characteristics. But the other thing was also to inform them about what Jane Jacobs stood for. She was an urban activist, and her concerns around how the city was developing was primarily to sort of focus on making more humane cities built for pedestrians versus cities built for cars, cities where there is always, like she says, there are always eyes on the street, as in you don't need policing. So the minute you are cognizant about, like for instance, just to give you an example, if you have something that's running like a kirana store or something like that, and it's also about how safe women feel walking on the street, right? So it's like, if you know that there is someone who's actually watching out for you, right, you feel a bit more safe. So these are all like gendered perspectives on space. How do actually women feel in the public realm in India versus men? So maybe I was a bit more sensitive to it because I feel conscious about walking in certain areas in Hyderabad. So I feel like it is time for us to look at her works, because they were all about how to make cities more safe, humane, how to make cities or build cities for people who cannot afford driving around in the safety of a car, who cannot afford the entertainment that a big cinema can give you, who need other forms of entertainment. So yeah, so that through those walks and just reading about her, that was a learning from in itself. Then of course, when I went to Barcelona, I was just, that was a whole different experience. Actually, the way, again, another instinctive decision, and I don't know, because I've not heard of anyone going to this university, but I looked up the program, and I've always wanted to, because everybody knows the kind of interventions that were executed in Barcelona was such a short period of time for the Olympics back then. So, and a lot of Indian cities, when it comes to urban design and urban planning, they are actually looking at Barcelona as a case example of how to execute, and with limited resources, how to make maximum impact, right? So it was one more city that I subconsciously wanted to go because of my interest in the public realm. So I looked up this program. ETSA was actually started in 1875. It's a very old school. And some of the alumni are like Antonio Gaudí and Joseph Louis Cerf and Enrique Miralles and also Vijarque, and so it sort of, I decided that, okay, this is the right time for me to go, because I needed some time to sort of also introspect on my work. And also because it was a theory-oriented program, wherein the first semester was all about writing essays about the city, and then how do you actually translate those ideas about the city and your perceptions into a project. And the good part about that program was they encouraged us to look at our cities, right? So after a long time, I was actually revisiting Hyderabad because I was traveling, I was going to all of these different places. And so so and actually being there, and the course was never always in the classroom. We always had tours of the city and all the many projects that the architects in Barcelona have executed over the many years. And most of them public projects. So Oriol Boigas was also like he also was an alumni of ETSAB. He went on to become mayor. So, I mean, look, an architect is just not an architect there. He's a politician, right? He is in a position to make decisions. And that is so great, right? I mean, because our stint working with the government in Hyderabad has made us realize that I wish we had more influencers in the government. So Oriol Boigas he became the mayor I think at that particular point of time, and he commissioned a lot many projects in the city to young architects during the Olympics. But I think the idea behind most of the projects was that you don't look at consolidating all the sports infrastructure to one area of the city. You look at the entire city and how you're going to use this as an opportunity to rejuvenate the city, right? So they popular, I mean, everybody there calls it acupuncture, where you're identifying that problem area and you're puncturing it over there, right? So it's called urban acupuncture. That's something that everybody talks about. They're like, you don't have to necessarily go for the most expensive solutions to rejuvenate the city. You just need to identify certain areas and prick it right there, and then it will create the change that you're looking for. So I guess most of their even the architecture is one that looks at the city as a canvas. So you're not necessarily designing in isolation. Everything that happens in even the architecture that is built, most of the buildings, they're all like paying tribute to the city, and that is something I just loved about it. And also, like, we keep discussing that, being a student, not having much money in our pocket, I was able to enjoy it, as in like enjoy the nature in the city, walk on the streets, commute in the cheapest possible way, not necessarily in a car. Like most of our professors used to take the tram and come, right? So why can't we think about all of these in the context of Indian cities? Why are we building cities which are, so, what do you say, exclusive? And why projects like this still happen in Bombay and Delhi, where a lot many architects sort of work with communities and NGOs to try and build public spaces, but it doesn't happen in Hyderabad, not yet. So that is what we actually set off doing at Deccan Amalgam, but before which I think I've spoken too much.
Yeah. No, hi. Just before you start, I'm just going to summarize everything. This is how you'll know I'm paying attention or not. So,
right.
Yeah. So before completing your undergraduation, you dropped a semester down to work with Suryanarayan Murthy at Kshetra Conservation Architects. And then you also worked briefly with some interior architects and with some landscape architects called Navin Associates. And then you went on and you did your internship with Beyond Build in Bangalore. You came back. You also started working again here. Then you collaborated with Studio Made with architect Madhusudan. And then that was around for a year. And then you went to...
No, I worked with him for a year. And then later on, I think much later after RMA, I just worked on a project basis with him.
Correct. But before that, you went to Colombia at GSAP.
And came back.
And then came back and then worked with RMA. That was for another 2.5 years. And then you went, then I think it was briefly at that time you worked with Studio Made, and then you went to Sangha. That was around for 9 months to a year. And then you went to Barcelona at S1Ep again. So I know this is not like a competition, Zoha, but this is like you.
It's never competition. It can't be.
Yeah. Over to you.
Well, yeah. For me, you will not take long to remember. It's pretty straightforward. So, well, yeah. So, when I was studying architecture, went on a summer break because my family always lived in the Middle East. My father is also an architect, and he was working.
So he didn't need those mentors. He's had a mentor since childhood. So
I don't know if that
so,
is
so the training has started pretty early. Yeah.
true, but let's get to that later. Yeah. So yeah, when you have father architects, the stories are different, Anyway, so yeah, I was in Doha on a summer break, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to just sit around for a couple of months and do nothing. Let me get working. So I applied to a few firms, and I got through a very large Australian architectural and engineering multidisciplinary practice that is about 7,000-8,000 employees across the globe, and 500 of them were in Doha at that time. So I got through that, and I got through the core design team, which was a small team of about 10 architects that was led by the principal then, who was pre-Fonseca, a Sri Lankan Australian architect who worked with Jeffrey Bawa and many other architects across Sri Lanka and Australia. So back then, I mean, in his time. And for me, that was like an eye opener, being in this. So from this sleepy town that Hyderabad is, I was suddenly put into this massive powerhouse, where we're doing very large projects like hotels, cities, urban design. We're doing airports, we're doing towers, 30-story, 50-story towers, and of course at that time I didn't have any experience to warrant working but we had the learning from pre all through. And at the end of that 3 months or 2.5 months of working, Pre came to me and said, Zoha, what's your plan? So I said, I'm going back in another 3 years till I finish architecture, or 2 years till I finish architecture. So why don't you take a year off? And that's what triggered this whole taking a year off thing. So I called up Ali Farid, Professor Ali Farid back then, and I told him, sir, this is my mentor here says that I should take a year off, and it will be a lot more fruitful than going back and waiting to finish. And I think that was the best decision I took ever, because it completely changed my perspective of what it takes to be an architect, and it rationalizes a lot of your thoughts from school and university. And fortunately, I think Sir was in a good mood, so he said, "Okay, go for it." And then he convinced the director and all of that to let me take that year off, which was a big taboo back then.
Yeah.
So then that's when me, Sneha, and another friend of ours, Bari, he did the same. He took a year off. So after which, actually, I only came back to college briefly. Like I took that whole year and worked on these really nice, very large projects. Of course, there were projects of a newer city. They were all essential to a city that is under construction, that is under making. I think a city that has very little, I would say, does not have a very deep historical or cultural context, especially Doha. I mean, other parts of the Middle East have a very. Doha was just nothing but a small fishing town, a fishing village, and a small pit stop for traders.
I mean, there are archaeological sites of archaeological importance over here, but I guess most of the historical architecture is
not more than 80 years old.
80 years old.
Yeah. So it's a very new city. So yeah, so that's what happened, and I worked there. So I somehow managed to come back and do a year, and then come back again to Doha to do my internship under Pre, and then continued working since 2006 until 2010. So in 2010, Pre left back to Australia. He retired and he went back, and the thing with these large practices, every time the teams change, the people change, systems change, it becomes different. And I think at that point I was sort of wanting to scale down the kind of work we were doing, because in a large A&E practice you don't get to see projects through always, because there are specific teams for specific activities, right? So if you are a part of a front end, a team that does the design, and then you take the project through to detail design, and once it's gone out to the supervision team, and you occasionally get to visit site and see it through. And the complexities are so big that so large that you don't really get to um, sort of look at it closely at all times, because there are specialists for everything. Everything is looked at by specialists. You have a specialist for facade, you have a specialist for whatever, various components, the MEP, etc., etc. But the good thing about working in a large E&E is you have the entire building ecosystem there in your office. If you want to ask something about energy, you have those guys, the environmental team sitting there, few meters away from you. If you want to talk about structure, MEP, HVAC, and they're all there, and you get, because buildings are more complex now, and especially in regions like here where we're highly dependent on energy and more active systems to keep the building up and running and comfortable. They're very, very complex. So that was really interesting, to get into the depths of the working of a complex building. So when in 2010, when Pri left, I was like, okay, I have to scale down. I need to sort of slow down a bit and look at more projects more intimately. And that's when I thought, okay, I think I'm okay to start a small practice here in Zohar. And that's when I started a little studio here, and with the intent of taking on things that I could control and see them through. And yeah, that's what happened. And since then, I've been practicing, doing varied range of projects here, from the small residence to sometimes we've done malls, and we've done some hotels, we've done small apartment buildings, depending on whatever came our way at various points. And then in 2016 is when we met, me and Sneha. Actually, we know each other since much longer. Yeah, and I did, yes. 2013, I did the master's. Actually, what happened was, when I was running this little practice, I don't come from a business background or a background that understands running a practice, because my father is also employed, and he works for a very large organization too. So I had absolutely no understanding of running a practice and keeping it afloat. And I was thinking, okay, let me, and somehow I came across this program in Madrid at the Institute of the Empresa, which dealt with the running of a practice, because we are never taught how to sustain a design studio. It's very difficult sometimes to sustain a design studio. And I was like, okay, I need to go out and do this if I have to ensure the longevity of the studio. And it sort of was very interesting, because we had these one-on-one dialogues with say Nicholas Grimshaw and Zoha Razvi and David Chipperfield and BRK and all these. We had this 2 to 3 day interaction with them at varied points, with all of these big and small practices, and each one of them would sort of tell us their experiences in their scale, right? So we met Adis, and Adis is again a very large A&E firm, and then we met somebody like Zoha and somebody like Grimshaw and David Chipperfield and some very small studios in UK that are like 4 or 5 member studios, and it sort of helped us understand the spectrum of architectural studios and how they sustain, what's their ideology, how do they run their practices, what is their core beliefs, and each one of them has whatever is relevant to them. So this sort of helps clear in your head, how you want to run your practice and what you want to do. So that was quite a nice program for me as well. And then life went on. Another 3-4 years of doing varied projects in Zohar, and then eventually we met to start Deccan Amalgam in Hyderabad. And maybe Sneha can tell you what and how we decided to start Deccan Amalgam in Hyderabad.
Yeah.
So that's basically it. Yeah.
Lovely, wonderful. Just before we go to that, just based on your careers and your professional learnings, I have like 2 things that I've noticed, which is in a sense are kind of critical. One of them is the courage or the conviction to actually to drop out if needed and to work to get that practical and professional experience. And students right now who it's still a taboo right now, I feel. People might not
Absolutely.
people might not have the same courage or conviction to do it, but it in a sense actually helps a lot. And it will add up, and it definitely is something that will there are people who also somehow manage to do both. Like you said, you were initially going to college to attend your classes, and then you were coming back to work at offices as well. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, when after working for so long, you felt the need to go back to studying to the studying board again. So you both of you went to do your masters.
Yeah,
But
I was 30. I was 30 when I went. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so now between these two parallel stories which were happening, everything kind of, I feel, kind of intersected at different points. You're working, you're learning, you're working, you're learning, and then both are happening at the same time. So it almost synergizes as one thing, and it's part of your growth story. So I want you to like tell a little bit about what it takes, or maybe in a kind of advocacy or a perspective that you have, what it takes to actually make that move to come out of college and to work outside, and then the need again to go back to school and study again after working for such a long time.
Yeah. Do you want to take this or should I?
Yeah, for me, it was very objective, to be honest. And even through college, I was always raring to go work, and I didn't find the means to do that at that time because I think it's just the college life is such. You sort of don't see what you could do. But when I took this break, summer break, when I went to Zoha over the summer break, it just naturally happened. I applied, I got through, and after that there was always this mentor who was sort of carving the way, and directing you and sort of clearing your thoughts, or sort of rather articulating your thoughts for you, which is very important because I don't know how it would be if I didn't do that. It's even though my father was an architect, but wouldn't say he was my mentor. My my boss at this Australian firm was the mentor. So and he used to tell me, you know what, when we were studying, we were in university for 3 hours a day, and the remaining hours we were out working for 7 years. And that is how we went through. And I can't believe you guys don't do that. And so he was pretty old school that way. And he sort of always forced me to keep working. And so, yeah, that always happened. And then when I decided to do my master's, that was again very objective. I felt that there was something lacking. Yeah, so the idea to do this master's was because it was the only master's course at that time that sort of connected the reality of the profession, sort of brought out the reality of the profession and sustaining an architectural practice.
Yeah, that's very important. How do you sustain, right?
Yeah.
That, I mean, those are skills that you actually need to be taught in college itself, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of talent, but then what is the point if you don't know how to stay afloat? Right,
and manage also. You need to know how to,
because see, that's actually doing a huge disservice to the country, because a lot of people who can contribute effectively are sort of getting, what do you say, overwhelmed by the problems that come along with running a practice, and how do you manage it, etc., etc. I mean, we all have to figure out our own unique ways of managing it, doing something else, and so, but at the end of the day, if you're able to effectively, I feel, contribute to the design dialogue in the country, I feel like a job is done at that,
And it was also from the experience of these more successful practices, which is very rare to get. So that is what, we went through. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was, like I said, I really needed time, because and it's also because you're working with people with such strong personalities and ideas, right? So I mean, So, and all of them are so different in the way they approach a project, right? So, like for instance, working in Bombay at RMA was so different from working in Ahmedabad in Sangat, right? Very different. Similarly, then working at Hyderabad was very different again. So then for me to sort of take a step back and see what my interests are and what is the direction that I would like to take in life, it was important for me to take a break at that point, right? So, I didn't go for the master's thinking, oh, it's going to get me a, better job in, in a different country or whatever. I needed that time I wanted to, and I felt like I had made enough money by then. So, to save up and to go for this master's, right? So that's a huge criteria for some people as well, right? So, so the financials of it is something that I was also looking at. So, like, okay, fine, I've sort of worked enough. I have a bit of savings, and I can sort of take this sort of what do you say? This kind of I can take the time off, even if it was just a year's program. But we had great professors. There was Edward Brew, and I was just particularly inspired by this one professor we had, um, Zaida Mashi. She is a hardcore feminist, like and and it's amazing because Barcelona right now has a feminist mayor who has feminism is part of their it's on their website, right? Like which country in the world like puts up a feminist agenda on their website? Right? So sorry, which city in the world? So Zaida was like a huge influence because she would constantly be talking about how urban planning, urban design, architecture to the smallest level of design doesn't really take into account it's sort of gender biased, whatever is done, because mostly planners are like obviously they're coming from their own experiences of being male. They're limited because they don't really know what the other half of the population actually feels safe about or wants, or in a city. So I feel like her classes were amazing. So of course, and it was also like I feel like Barcelona was one of the reasons that I actually wanted to come back to Hyderabad, because seeing all of this being done in the city and actually being executed in a resource efficient way, I felt like maybe we can try doing the same for our city. And also because the course was structured in such a way that we were forced to think about our city, right? It was not about just thinking about a design project, but it was thinking about the city as a project. So all the writings that I had I had the time to think about there. So it was basically the first semester, like I said, it was all about writing essays, thinking, speculating, theorizing problems in the city. And then the second semester was how do you put all of these thoughts into a project. So at that particular point of time, I had chosen Necklace Road as the site of intervention. And I was really looking at how to learn from Barcelona in terms of how they have sort of facilitated access to the sea. If you see some of the really old images, there were a lot of industries along the coast. And what they wanted to do was make it more public, make the coast more public, accessible to the citizens, right? Because they have a right to the sea, they have a right to experience the beauty of nature. Why does it have to be privatized, all of it? So I was looking at the same with respect to Necklace Road, because you have this huge railway track running all across, which sort of cuts it from direct accessibility. Yes, a lot of cars and bikes and people are able to access it, but no one can come across the railway line, right? So that makes it less accessible to pedestrians, to people who cannot afford cars or bikes. So so I was really looking at how do you intervene maybe in 3 areas where you can look at sort of architecture as a bridge, right? Architecture, and also, but architect not only as a physical and infrastructural bridge, but also a bridge across time. So I was trying to look at some of the typologies, the historic typologies in Hyderabad, like the Baradaris. They were like these platforms on high hilltops. So how do you actually look at a historic typology in a very contemporary context? So that was what my thesis was about. It was exhibited actually at the Tracing Narratives exhibition, which was organized by the Leaf Foundation. I'm sure you are aware of it. It is an initiative by Aniket Bhagwat. I had the opportunity to revisit that project because we are putting together stuff for the exhibition. And then later on, yes, I mean, when we started Deccan Amalgam at that point, we were very conscious that we want to be more active in the public realm, not only private projects. I mean, we were doing like interiors and some houses, but also when we are looking at those projects, also we like, how can we make it more effective and how can we help? I mean, not only in terms of form, materiality, but also in their pure function and existence, how can they actually contribute to making maybe rejuvenating a part of the city. So and then we started collaborating with a lot many NGOs, and I think it was because of this presentation I had given at the Tracing Narratives that we got involved with the Kudikunta rejuvenation project very briefly. And then from there, we got involved in another lake rejuvenation project, the Pedda Cheruvu rejuvenation project, for which we had put together the detailed project report. And in that particular project, we were trying, and it was a learning for us, because most lake rejuvenation projects in Hyderabad are actually just looked at cosmetically, like a beautifying thing, put a pedestrian track around it, but no one's actually addressing issues of biodiversity, of how do you actually treat the sewage effluents that are coming into the lake. So I think through these projects, it really helped us. And also I think we spent so much of time sitting in government offices, talking to various departments, mayors, zonal commissioners, like it was, and understanding the politics behind how decision making happens, right? We are right there, and how it's very complicated. It's complicated, in Indian cities to. I mean, you cannot say I have a good idea and it's going to be executed. There are multiple things that happen that are going to influence the decisions that are taken, right? So it's not easy, and it can be very disappointing and discouraging, because then you realize, oh, I have the best, we have the best intention at heart to do this project, but maybe it's not going to go through because of other factors. And then we also did this sort of research project for the Hyderabad Urban Lab, which was basically studying auto construction in the city. And it was sort of a project we had done for CES, wherein they were looking at forging, sort of a new framework for collective housing. So that was a larger project, and we were documenting a small settlement, Basti settlement near our office, the Film Nagar Bastis. And through that project, it was it was all about self-built housing, right? So we did a proper research, our team back in the studio, and these are all projects that we discuss collectively. Guys, do we want to do this? And then it's never me or him taking the decision, right? So we have this wonderful team of young graduates who are very enthusiastic also to take up such work. So we're like, guys, do we do this? And then they were like, yes. I mean, it's an exciting documentation to be done. So so this particular auto construction research that we were doing helped us understand like what goes into in the making of housing for the larger masses, or for the underprivileged. So I mean, and it's about the fact that does a top-down approach actually work in such cases, or whether it is best to let them build whatever, or it's best to let people build whatever they want to build. So it was about how people have built their houses in a very sort of what do you say, informed way. When I say informed, I mean to say they are informed by their own resources, their availability to resources, their future plans. So I mean to say, like, a lot of bastis go through this whole redevelopment, right, where the government provides housing, but and not necessarily with complete understanding of what is required by the people. So I think that was a great learning for us, also in terms of how materials are used judiciously. So as architects, our role was to really understand what are the kind of materials they use to build their houses, and also how does it fit into their long-term plan.
Even it's what they do, it is also relevant to what they do, their trade, their occupation, and their lives, which we might not understand or may not have the knowledge of. And that is quite an eye-opener, because how they go about their homes and how they plan them and what is important to them is very different from what we imagine is important to them. It's very different.
Yeah.
If you see their houses, they're all turned around, the way they are planned and the way it's very different.
And also because Film Nagar is along a contoured, I'm sure you're aware, right? The area I'm talking about. So how do you negotiate terrain? Right. And also that might necessitate that they build a smaller footprint, but go high. I don't know. So so we also exhibited this particular documentation of us at the Dodin in 2018. And I think part of our exercise was making this huge terrain model. And the idea behind it was like Anand sir keeps saying that it's to inform citizens that we have a terrain in Hyderabad. People keep thinking it's a flat city, right? So, and that is why, because, it's about the perceptions that we carry, right? So many houses in Jubilee Hills, if you see, they just flatten the terrain. And maybe because this narrative about the terrain is not built into the larger conscience of the city, right? So then we made this whole terrain model, and a lot of people are like, oh, there's such a steep drop. I mean, like, is there a ridge running through Hyderabad? Like, yeah, there are hillocks, right? So, of course, we are trying to do whatever little we can in sort of the appreciation of the larger natural landscape as well. And then, of course, we also worked on a public transport center at the airport for GMR. And that was a good learning experience as well, because we were designing for people who are commuting from a lot, like from the districts
and the villages, because
to the airport.
Not everyone arrives like us. There are people who come in buses, they come by trains, they have varied modes of transport, and there is no place in the main terminal for them to arrive actually. So currently they arrive in a parking lot across the street on the other side of the terminal. And so GMR wanted to create a proper public transport center for people coming in from other parts of the city or the region or the state or districts or wherever. And it's like a bus terminal / taxi stand / parking / like a small interchange. So that's quite an interesting project as well. It's very different from the big mega building that there is.
So in that project we were working with a private client, right? So we understand that there are these many actors in the city, and we have to work with all of them to know what it takes to intervene in a more sensitive way. So we worked with the government, we interacted with many NGOs. We also took up this documentation project. Thankfully, in 2016, one of the main reasons for me to actually want to even be in Hyderabad was documenting the step wells, the whole Telangana step well documentation, which architect Yashwant Ramamurthy is heading. So we helped with the initial documentation of, so we used to travel to these many, small districts around Telangana to document various step wells, and just understanding, and for me it was like, I've never actually traveled outside Hyderabad in Telangana. Not, I don't think I have. So this was a really good experience for us to actually understand that there are other sort of small towns that are also thriving, centers which are not given much attention to. It's always the big cities. So I think that was a good experience as well. In just helping and in just improving our own understanding of the urban and the rural, in India. And how do we place ourselves as architects, not necessarily only looking at exclusively like, residences and private properties, but also how do we look at effectively intervening in the public realm? Yeah. Yeah, so I think that was the reason we started Deccan Amalgam, so that it can be a research-based studio, and we are intervening, or rather trying to discover more of the public realm of Hyderabad. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's absolutely wonderful, and really excited for the work that you guys are doing as well. But I also want to slightly go back and just mention this, that, when you are applying to these offices, when it comes to Kshetra or beyond built and RMA and even Sangha, there's a commonality that I can see, that you're looking for. These practices deal with conservation work, they deal with urban projects, they deal, and even though this is not part of Studio Made, but Madhusudan is also very interested in the public realm. That's the major focus of his practice and his work as well. And on the other hand, Zoha comes from a background where he has seen as the city grow, as from a new emerging landscape, and then how these two coming together, and the projects that you're doing kind of resonate with these initial decisions that you took when you're planning out your careers, which steps to take. So it might not seem all clear when you're in the moment, but then when you look back, it all makes a nice linear timeline where all these things actually fall in place.
Maybe you can connect the dots, but these are all like, they are all subconscious decisions, right? So maybe like, so what is instinct, right? We keep having this discussion. What is instinct? Instinct is not something that is not informed by knowledge, right? Instinct is something that we are not able to articulate, but is there in our subconscious sort of, so maybe it sort of helps in decision making. So yeah, I mean,
no, 100%. I totally agree with that. I also wanted to ask you, like, the kind of projects that you're dealing with is something that a lot of architects dream to have. I think the biggest thing that they want to contribute is towards the public realm, but these are not opportunities that everyone gets. So I want to understand how you were able to engage yourself through all these urban projects, and what were the inception of these projects that you're dealing with right now.
Yeah. So, it all happened. I mean, honestly speaking, we always, like I said, like many architects want to sort of get involved in the public realm, but then we need to also understand that it is discouraging, and I mean, after a certain point of time, most people give up, right? It's because of the fact that we are not prepared to handle what happens, in India, in the government circles. We are not trained to handle it. So you can say that maybe it is a fault of the architects itself, that we are so sort of thinking about ourselves and so like obsessed over ideas, that we are not necessarily being real about things that can be done. But for us, it is like we are just hopeful, like, because I'll tell you why. Because Zoha, here, even in Doha, actually, a lot much of importance is given to the public realm in terms of public institutions, libraries, museums, the seafront, parks, and things can be done, obviously, because of a very different political system. Things can be done efficiently and quickly over here, right? So that keeps our morale boosted, right? So the fact that, see, the thing is, if you're constantly in an environment where you're seeing that, it's one disappointment after the other, it can, bring down your morale. But by placing yourself in two different environments, which, because we have families, we have work in two different places, by doing this, one thing feeds our morale. We know that we are hopeful that things can be done, so it helps push us. And so, like I said, one of the main reasons why architects sort of, I know they want to, but once you start working in the public realm, you get sort of, and honestly, it might not be the same kind of monetary satisfaction that you get from versus doing a private building. So, I mean, I guess it has its reasons and it has to change. I mean, it involves a change in government attitudes towards planners, architects, wherein I guess the profession has to be respected. But also, it is also about us also pushing, So, for instance, one of the main things that got us, like, I said, I think I mentioned this before, that I'd given a presentation about the Necklace Road project, and then I met this really vibrant and really powerful person there, who's actually doing a lot towards water conservation in the city, Kalpana Ramesh. So she's an environmentalist, she's also an architect, and that's how we sort of wanted to help her with some of the projects that she's doing as an NGO, right? So a lot of the public projects these days are being done as, or rather the lake rejuvenations are being taken up as CSR initiatives. But also there are a lot many stakeholders that you have to answer to. So you have the company that is putting in the money, then there is an implementation agency, then there is the government, and then there are the other irrigation government
departments,
HMW, SSP, so I feel like one of the main reasons or our push was actually through kind-hearted souls, who put in a good word about us in the government circles. And then later on, after that, we've been actively engaged. I remember, like, in 2017 we were also trying to help out with restructuring the whole high-tech city road, in terms of streamlining the road widths and the pedestrian pathways, and that didn't go through per se. Most of these projects don't go through, and then I mean, they don't get done. I mean, we put forward the proposal, but they don't necessarily materialize into anything. Then we worked on a few parks and GHMC parks, and like I said, this was all our way of kind of engaging with the government. You don't necessarily make any money out of them. So yeah, and then also we keep ourselves engaged with. We were conducting some walks even in 2017 with HOL. So that gives us a whole different perspective, So it's not just about working with the government and decision-making authorities, but it's also keeping yourself engaged with the community, with the public, right? So, I mean, you need to be doing both, and you need to be engaged with all the various actors in the city. Like I said before, you also have to engage with the private, with the big, with the big companies, because they're the ones at the end of the day, I think right now, putting in the money towards public projects. So yeah, so it's not it's just that through word of mouth we've gotten ourselves into working with the government, but it's not through any kind of personal relationships, or not through personal contacts or anything like that.
No, I absolutely agree. That's the current state of things.
Yeah,
But it's very important that there is some amount of self-initiation also, because otherwise
exactly.
nothing moves. It's always there,
Yeah,
and there are many opportunities also in this sense, because it's like everything is in a very dilapidated or in a very undone or bad state. And like I can name many projects in Hyderabad itself where it needs a lot of urban designing and urban rejuvenation and urban reactivation places as well. And there are like n number of places where this can happen. I want to actually ask a little bit about your experience working on the Charminar pedestrianization project, which is
yeah.
happening, which was a proposal which was given by the Vastu Shilpa consultants, but also taken up by Kshetra architects as well. A little bit
Yes.
about that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my role back then, because I was just like, studying as well at the same time, I had actually, and because I was just learning like Revit back then, I had modeled the entire Patagati, Charminar, and all of that. So my role was predominantly in documentation of the existing, heritage facade of Patagati as well as Charminar, but also I had briefly, helped out with the survey of shopkeepers around there as to how they want their boards to be designed. Because right now, I mean, previously, if you went, there were boards of different sizes. So, it takes away from the beauty of the building as such. So it was about, doing a survey, finding out from every shopkeeper what he wanted. And so that somehow we can put together a design that satisfied, not if not for all, most of the criteria that they have. So again, that was like an excellent exercise in how in to take public opinion, in how do you do surveys to find out what people want and not generally impose something on them.
Great. I want to ask this to Zoe. When you are working in the Middle East, companies working, especially multinational companies, it's sometimes the work environment is kind of tough. You need to be up to the mark in terms of deadlines, in terms of deliverables. So, how is the work culture there like? And especially the work environment there. Like, there's sometimes it gets really tough, and you need to stand up and get things moving.
Yeah, no, generally it is a it's a very efficient mechanism, I would say. The people are all everybody is working in a very tight system of delivery and time and economics and man hours, and it's a very standard large company
It's also
system.
because of the way the government,
Yeah.
the
No, it's also because
sanctioning works.
the way the projects are delivered and all that is it's all apart from the design, there's a lot of numbers around that govern this. So yeah, it's actually very challenging that way. But you realize that the timelines and all are very real if you think of it, and because the way the projects are spaced and all, they're done in a very realistic manner. So when I first actually started, I was like, okay, I need to only do this, and there's so much time for it. I actually felt otherwise. I was like, okay, there's so much time. How could that be? So, and as the pressure keeps growing, then you realize, okay, as you become a bit more senior and you keep going through the projects at different levels, then you realize that okay, yeah, it gets very challenging. So, but I'd say that they most of these large practices they manage their time very well. They know how to organize projects very well. They know how to deliver them. They're like machines. Which is maybe architecturally not so great at times, because sometimes because we were part of the design, the main design team. Sometimes you're a little frustrated. You're left frustrated because everything is so cornered and balanced in how they will deliver. There are cutoff times, there are man hours, maximum amount of hours you can spend. So it's very calculative that way, which sometimes bogs you down. But it is in the interest of the project, in the interest of being able to wrap it up. It's unlike how we usually do as architects. We like to take our time
But
and
it's
all
also
that.
the local bodies here that help you regulate, right?
Yes. Also, there is lots of regulation here.
Yeah.
It's not like one GHMC approval. It is tremendous amounts of legalities and liabilities around what you do
Yeah.
So that is the other reason why everything is so stringent. There are laws that determine what will be the consequence of not adhering to a law or not following a code or not
building laws like they are, but most often, you must be aware of bylaws and the condition in Hyderabad, right? So here, it's pretty stringent and strict about what are the timelines to be followed, what are the submission approvals to be given at what time. So I think a lot of the monitoring is also done by the local authorities over here, so that also helps a lot, streamline your own process.
Yeah. And in terms of the practice itself, I think most of the Western practices are very, very professional. The work environment is very different from what it would be in a typical studio. So it's quite a nice experience, to be a part of a very level. It is hierarchical, unfortunately, but that is the way it is. But it is still very level, in terms of how you communicate and your ideas are put across, and everybody has a say. Everybody can speak and talk and express their ideas and be taken seriously. So they have all this. It's like any other big multinational. They have these ideas sorted of equality and this and that, equal opportunity and all of that. So yeah, big practices that way are governed by these laws themselves internally as well.
Yeah.
Right. No. Before I actually wrap this up, the reason why I asked this is I want to ask some fun trivia questions right now. Like I want to know how like people who have worked all their lives, all the way from their undergrad, you must be like working always around the clock. So how many hours does Sneha and Zoha work, especially managing two firms, not one? So
no, I think I've cut down the number of hours I do now.
Okay.
8 to 10 now, but I'm sure a couple of years ago, I think I was easily doing 15 to 16, and around 15 to 16 hours.
7 days a week?
Almost, yeah.
Because he's also off on like the weekend. Here, the weekend is Friday and Saturday, so he's mostly attending meetings even on weekends. Yeah. So yeah, I think I have that way a bit of luxury to take my own time to do things, and maybe that's the understanding between us. Like you take all the pressure because he loves it. He loves speed. So that's what I said, right? Like he's a racer, so he likes the speed. I'm sort of a laid back, taking my time to do things. So right now, yes, we are trying to find that common ground, but I also find there's a beauty in, our constant frictions, right? So I'm sure in due course of time, we'll figure out like that middle ground where we can, we are able to work with less friction, but it's just that it's very interesting the way he approaches a project and the way I go about approaching a project, and I think both of them are essential in in putting together something that is holistic. So I think our skill sets are very different, and our work experiences are very different, and each one of us understands the importance of what the other person is doing. Right. So although we don't necessarily want to do that, but we understand the importance. Right. So yeah, it's just like living with diversity.
One last question. Now that you guys are doing a wide range of set of projects, and also been mentored by many architects, do you still get back to them and get in touch with them? Do you still take their advice or their mentorship even till now?
Yes, I do share some of the work that we do with our, with my mentors and people I've worked with, my ex-bosses, and it's always lovely to, especially with Rahul, it's always lovely to receive an immediate response from him. I'm just amazed. This person is such a busy person. He's so, but then the responses are absolutely so fast. So it just shows that, he really cares about everybody, and it's really heartwarming to actually receive a response from him. We do. But yeah, of course, with everybody, like, I just share whatever works that even recently we had actually, there's a project that we've done in, we've conceived in Mehboob which is a neighborhood in Hyderabad in the old city. And then I had written an article about it. It did not get through. It did not get built. But it is a sort of also a way that we intervene in the public realm through architecture, through materiality, through the way we detail a project, right? And in an area which we think is important to intervene, right? So we're like, okay, so if we actually look at the old city of Hyderabad, right? And we're like, where are the contemporary projects over there that are actually being sensitive to the place, right? It might be a building that's just 100 years old. There's nothing great to preserve, in that building architecturally, right? But it is important in terms of its urban form, right? What I mean by urban form is that this whole, built around a courtyard, right? And having retail below, residences above, it is important to preserve these characteristics, because, and it also, look at the pandemic, right? It has made us work from home. So actually the client of that particular project, which was an adaptive reuse in Mehboob has his house in Banjara Hills, and he had to commute almost 10 kilometers every day. He wanted to move back close to his home, right? So we saw that as a great reversing trend. People want to move away from the city. This guy wants to move back. We're like, oh, this could actually set a trend, an urban trend where people want to go live in the old city, right? And this could actually help rejuvenate the old city, because a lot of these, private owners of how, mixed use properties over there, which are basically family properties, they could actually help. It's not so, here again you have private individuals who can make a difference. It's not just the government, right? We have to rely on convincing people that it's similar to what was done in Barcelona in terms of an urban acupuncture. One project can make a difference. It can actually lead the neighboring property to do the same thing, instead of breaking down his building and building again and putting alucobond panel on the building and all of that. So I mean, if you actually go to the old city, like that entire Sultan Bazaar area, you'll see a lot of buildings are just clad with alucobond panels. And it's so unfortunate, because that place has such lovely vernacular architecture of these timber jarokas on top, projecting onto the roads, providing shade for the walkways below, right? And why are you trying to destroy that urban form, that character, and trying to, so yeah, so for us, again, that was an architecture project, but we knew that it could make a difference, but unfortunately it didn't go through. So I mean, but yeah.
Well, lovely. Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences and all your stories that you had to share. I'm really happy that I was able to connect, especially with young emerging architects who are really sensitive about these topics, and that's, you don't see so many people who are as sensitive towards their cities as often in time. But in that sense, I feel very fortunate that there are at least some architects who are focused, working towards public realm, especially in the cities that they live in, which makes a huge impact towards the city in terms of how the urban character develops over time. And it's really needed where things are all set back at this point of time, but also sets, like when you were saying about the balancing out the morale that you get from the working in Doha, and then that motivation to convert that into motivation working here in Hyderabad.
Yeah.
So
we all have our unique journeys. We all have to figure out how to keep ourselves afloat. So
Yeah.
I feel like we just have to. This is our journey. Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you so much for sharing your journey. It has been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for doing this
Thank you
episode.
so much, Vivek, for having us on your show.